This hugely important road trip is not going as planned for the Boston Bruins.
You're Locked On Bruins, your daily podcast on the Boston Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Bruins fans, and welcome back to the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. I'm your host, Ian McLaren, and this is a daily show where we discuss all things Spoked B. Today is Friday, December 13th. Woo! And I want to thank you so much for making Locked On Bruins part of your daily routine. It's free and available on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Now, if you stayed up for last night's stinker in Seattle, I wish you all the coffee today. Before we get started looking at the storylines, stats, and signals from last night's game, a quick reminder, you can find the podcast on social media at Locked NHL Bruins, and you can find me, my hockey thoughts, and dad jokes at Ian C. McLaren. I am a lifelong Boston Bruins fan. I've been hosting this podcast for 5 years. For 5 years prior to that, I was a full-time hockey news writer for The Score up here in Toronto. And I've been covering this team for various outlets for almost 20 years now, if you can believe it. And over that span, there's been very few times where I've looked at this team and thought, maybe this just isn't their year. Maybe this team just isn't very good, and perhaps it's time to start looking at next year. And this is one of those times. The Bruins have the pieces in place to be a competitive team, but there's just something off with this version of the Bruins, whether it be going all the way back to training camp and key players missing time due to a lack of contracts or injuries or recovering from injuries, or whether it's just a lack of depth and not replacing some players who left in free agency adequately. And while the Bruins had started to turn things around under interim coach Joe Sacco, they went 7-2 in their first 9 games. I've said over and over, the quality of competition wasn't quite there to give a real look at what this team is capable of. They're in the middle of a 5-game road trip that was going to be kind of make or break for this team. And right now, they appear to be pretty broken once again. After a 5-1 loss to Seattle on Thursday evening, where it was pretty much over before it began. I tuned in, started watching the Bruins, as has been their MO all season long. Got into early penalty trouble with David Pastrnak taking a double minor. The Kraken went on to score like in the first minute of this one to take a 1-0 lead. Then, shortly thereafter, another penalty taken. They didn't succeed on that power play, but scored very shortly after it ended to take a 2-0 lead into the second period. And that was all the offense that Seattle needed on this one. Oliver Bjorkstrand scoring 24 seconds into it, thanks to that David Pastrnak high-sticking double minor. Tyler Johnson tripped Will Borgen 3 minutes into the game. And again, Schwartz scored just a beautiful backhand goal after the penalty had expired. Brad Marchand did score a penalty shot goal halfway through the second period to kind of make it interesting, but that was all the offense this team could muster. And to add injury to insult, Elias Lindholm left this game early with a lower body injury and did not return. And Joe Sacco said they're going to get an update. They weren't sure about his status. They were told he wasn't available for the rest of the game, We'll see if he's available for Saturday night's game against the Vancouver Canucks. If not, get Matt Poitras up there because he's been rolling for Providence lately and can come in and play center. The Bruins on this road trip have been outscored 13-2. Some defensive lapses, lack of discipline, turnovers. That second goal in particular, Charlie McAvoy clearing attempt, scooped up by Shane Wright, I believe, a youngster. Passes it over to Schwartz, who scored just a beautiful, filthy backhand goal over Eunice Korpisalo, who kind of struggled in net. 4 goals on 20 shots for a .800 save percentage. But it wasn't all his fault. The Bruins just have not been playing sound hockey. The one highlight was Marchand scoring that pretty nice penalty shot goal. It was the 7th penalty shot goal of his career, tying him with Pavel Bure for the most penalty shot goals in league history. So next one he pots, he'll make NHL history with penalty shot proficiency. The Bruins went 0 for 4 on the power play, extending their struggles in converting on critical opportunities. But the big story in this one was just continuing to be outscored dramatically on this road trip. 8 goals against in Winnipeg, 5 goals against here in Seattle. They've generated only 2 goals for over these past 2 games. And, they had raised their goal differential up to, I believe it was -12. Now they're back down to -23, which is worse than what it was at the lowest point under head coach Jim Montgomery. And if you look league-wide, Boston's goal differential is 5th worst or 4th worst in the NHL, tied with Pittsburgh, who, they rattled off 9 goals last night against Montreal to raise that to -23. The Predators, the Sharks, and the Canadiens, all with worse goal differentials than the Bruins. And again, hockey's a very simple game. You have to score more than the opposition. The Bruins outshot Seattle 34-21 in this one. We'll talk more about the stats later on, but they weren't able to beat Philip Grubauer, who, let's be honest, has not been that strong of a goalie this season, making him look like a Vezina Trophy contender here. If they lose Lindholm for any length of time, that will obviously hurt their chances even more. But you bring up Matt Poitras, perhaps he can reinvigorate this team and get them back on track. But right now, the bottom line is this team does not look. The only way they'll be a playoff team is if other Eastern Conference teams around them continue to struggle, as they have been. Right now, they are 9th in the East in terms of point percentage, just like 0-1 behind Philadelphia, who's at 533. The Bruins are at 532. Philadelphia's won 2 in a row. The Bruins have lost 2 in a row. And it's not going to get any easier for these Boston Bruins, as they will head now back up north of the border to take on the Vancouver Canucks, the Calgary Flames, and the Edmonton Oilers. And perhaps it will be Lindholm who will not be able to play, reuniting or revisiting his 2 home arenas from last year in Vancouver and Calgary. We'll have to wait for word on the severity of that injury. If and when that drops here on Friday, I'll be sure to update you on the YouTube channel. So make sure you're following Locked On Boston Bruins over on YouTube for the latest on Lindholm. And, if it's anybody but Poitras who's recalled, that will be low-key infuriating because he's the guy that do not call Patrick Brown, do not call anybody else or Vinny Lettieri. Just please recall Matt Poitras and get him back up on this team. So the big storylines, Marchand tying NHL history with a penalty shot goal, but it's too few and far between the goals right now while the opposition is just taking advantage of a very vulnerable Bruins team. We'll look more at the stats and signals from this game here as the podcast continues. PrizePicks is straight up the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. Run your game all season long on PrizePicks, America's #1 daily fantasy sports app. You can make your holidays bigger and brighter with PrizePicks, the best place to get that real money sports action. And they now offer MasterCard for quick and easy deposits into your account this season. Join now because PrizePicks is giving away 2 free picks in December, and they're giving away $30+ million in rewards during Pixmas. All you have to do is download the PrizePicks app, use code LOCKEDONNHL, and get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app, use code LOCKEDONNHL, and get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. You can also get in on this weekend's NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL, all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. All you have to do is visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thank you so much once again for making Locked On Bruins part of your daily routine, free and available on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's check out some stats and signals from last night's game. And if you look 5-on-5, the Bruins perhaps deserved a better fate in this one. The Bruins had 60% of the shot attempts, 63% of shots 5-on-5. 52.2 advantage in terms of scoring chances, but Seattle had the lion's share of high danger chances in this one, 54.5%. In fact, 12 versus 10. Expected goals at 5-on-5 were 2.5 for the Bruins, 2.19 for the Kraken. And that's looking at all the various factors. Shot attempts, which is, just anytime you got the puck on your stick, you're firing it towards the net. Shots on goal, obviously. Scoring chances are legitimate attempts to score. High danger chances, usually in that home plate area around the net. Now, in all situations, it's a bit of a different story. The Bruins still had the lion's share of shot attempts and shots, but scoring chances were dead even, and Seattle had more high danger chances and had a slight advantage when it comes to expected goals. It was about 4 to 3.5. So it should have been a much closer game. Full credit to Philip Grubauer for shedding his abysmal under 900 save percentage and coming up with, 33 saves. The only goal he let in was that penalty shot from Brad Marchand. But the Bruins just couldn't get out of their own way to start this game. Taking those 2 early penalties, the double minor on David Pastrnak, who you just cannot afford to lose early on in the game and get him out of his groove or get him, not rolling to begin. And then Tyler Johnson coming in, taking a tripping penalty. And those 6 penalty minutes taken early on resulted in the power play goal from Bjorkstrand, and then Schwartz scoring like 4 seconds after Johnson's penalty expired. Those were the only 2 penalties taken by the Bruins in this game. To their credit, they were disciplined later on, but it was a bit too little too late, and they weren't able to muster the offense needed to beat the Kraken on this night. So Bruins went, I believe, 0 for 1 on their power play attempt. They did have a power play midway through the first period. They did not score on that. Kraken went 1 for 3, and that was a big difference in this one for sure. So what can we take from this effort going forward? Well, it's the second loss in their 5-game Western road trip. If you looked at the road trip as a whole, Winnipeg, Seattle, the 3 games coming up in Canada, I would have thought this game would have been their best chance to win. And I had hoped for early on that they would get at least 6 points from this road trip. They're going to have to go 3 for 3 against Vancouver, Calgary, and Edmonton. And that's going to be a very tough task because all 3 of those teams are currently in the playoff picture in the Western Conference. Vancouver, if you look at points, Edmonton's 5th, Vancouver 6th, Calgary's slightly out. They're 9th overall, but they're ahead of Colorado. So they're technically in 8th at the moment. So that's going to be a tough one for sure. All 3 of these games are going to be tough, especially if you don't have Elias Lindholm. Now, Lindholm hasn't been super effective for this team. Let's be honest. Not really living up to the big-time contract that he signed. He is currently sitting on, 3 goals, 10 assists for 13 points. Scoring at a lower rate than he did with Vancouver last season, where he had 12 points in 26 games, and that was considered a concerning drop-off for him. So he's not really rebounded from that. We'll see here if Matt Poitras is recalled. Please do not recall someone who's going to just play a depth role. They need Poitras to come in here if Lindholm can't play. David Pastrnak led the way here with 6 shots on goal. 6 goals would have been very nice, but alas, he was held off the score sheet. 6 shots on goal. Jordan Osterley, who was actually getting some power play time last night as well, with 4 shots. That shows you perhaps how lost this team looks. Mason Lohrei was actually scratched from this game in favor of Osterley, Witherspoon, and Peak in the bottom 3. Which, Mason Lohrei, he does have some warts. He does have some flaws in his game. But if you're looking to generate some more offense, for me, you need Lohrei in there as opposed to Osterley. Osterley playing over 20 minutes. For me, at this point, it's play the young guys as much as possible and get them ready for the future. This season, things aren't going very well. And I think you need to give Lohrei some bigger minutes. I think you need to call up Lysell, Merkulov, Poitras, and perhaps let's give some of these younger guys a shot instead of hanging on to these older guys who may or may not be part of the future. Like, with all due respect, Tyler Johnson, Morgan Geekie, Trent Frederick to some regard. It might be time to turn the page here and look a bit forward. Not to say this season is a write-off necessarily, but do we think the Bruins are a playoff team? Maybe. Do we think the Bruins can hang with any of the top teams in the NHL? Well, clearly not, because they've been blasted by several top teams. They lost last night to Seattle, who's not even a playoff team. This next week is really going to tell the story, and it begins with, it continues with tomorrow night's game against the Vancouver Canucks, and we'll preview that one here as the podcast continues. If you're looking to hire, you need Indeed. We are driven by the search for better, and when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. You don't search, you match with Indeed. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. And Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites. All you have to do is check out Indeed.com/lockedon, and listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility. Go to Indeed.com/lockedon and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on Locked On Boston Bruins. That's Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions do apply, but if you need to hire, you need Indeed. It does not get any easier for the Boston Bruins as they will be heading to Vancouver to take on Jake DeBrusk, Derek Forbort, Danton Heinen, and the Canucks, a team that beat the Florida Panthers 4-0 last night. And it was Jake DeBrusk and Danton Heinen who both scored in that one to help lead their team to victory. Earlier this season, I posted on social media that I believed that Jake DeBrusk would outscore any member of the Boston Bruins not named David Pastrnak. And it's pretty close at the moment between DeBrusk and Brad Marchand. In fact, almost identical. They have identical point totals. 23 points for DeBrusk through 28 games. 23 points for Brad Marchand through 31 games. Marchand has 12 goals, 11 assists. DeBrusk has 14 goals and 9 assists. So that's proving to be fairly accurate, I think. And DeBrusk had a slow start in Vancouver. He's on a bit of a heater. We all expect, as we've seen in the past, that he might cool down a bit. But right now he's on pace for 41 goals, 26 assists, and 67 total points, which we know would be career highs for DeBrusk. He never cracked the 30-goal mark in Boston. He had a career high of 50 points. And let's be honest, the Bruins could really use that kind of production from DeBrusk right now. Part of the problem with this team is that they allowed DeBrusk, Heinen to walk in free agency, and they did not replace them adequately. Instead, choosing to sign Elias Lindholm, Nikita Zadorov in free agency, and then trying to add some depth options in Max Jones, Riley Tufte, and then later on Tyler Johnson. Zadorov has been more miss than hit. I talked about Lindholm's struggles early on, and now he's injured. And now the Bruins are left with, Marchand, Pastrnak, and then a bunch of guys who are not getting the job done. There's a 9-point gap between Marchand, who's second on the team in points, and third, Justin Brazeau. I'm a huge Brazeau fan, but if he's third on your team in total points, then that is a problem. Pavel Zacha struggling, only 13 points in 31 games. Identical point total to Elias Lindholm. Trent Frederick, only 11 points. Charlie Coyle being outproduced by Cole Koepke and Mark Kastelik. Coyle and Geekie are near the bottom in terms of forwards on this team. In terms of point production, they only have 9 points each. 9 points for Coyle in 31 games, 9 points for Geekie in 26 games. Only John Beecher has fewer points, as well as Tyler Johnson and Mark McLaughlin, who's got 6 games now with 0 points to show for it. So perhaps it's time to end that experiment, bring up some guys who can get the job done offensively, like Matt Poitras, for example. Georgi Merkulov played. I don't know why McLaughlin's up here instead of Merkulov. Merkulov played much better than McLaughlin in fewer games. Heck, bring up Fabian Lysell and let these guys show what they can do. Anyways, this game, I do not expect to go in Boston's favor because Vancouver is just a better team, and the Bruins are coming in here tripping over themselves based on these 2 games so far on this road trip. The Bruins still are 15-3-3. The Canucks are 15-8-5. They're coming off that big win over Florida after 2 losses. They're 6-2-2 over their past 10, but only 2-5 over their past 5 games. Or sorry, 2-2-1, I should say, in their past 5. The Bruins are 6-4 in their last 10, but losing the last 2 games in ugly fashion. The Canucks have a top 10 offense, ranking 3.29 or scoring 3.29 goals per game. That's ranked 9th. Their defense is a bit leaky, 16th, allowing 3.07 goals per game, but Thatcher Demko back for them, and Kevin Lankinen, that's a pretty nice duo in net. The Bruins, 29th in goals per game, 2.48, and 25th in goals allowed. Again, you look at them as a playoff team, as a contender, all you have to do is look at their goals for and against. Hockey's a simple game. Score more than the other team. The Bruins have not been doing that at all this season, and they have such a bad goal differential, one of the worst in the NHL. This team is closer to the lottery than Stanley Cup contention. That's just a fact right now. They have the league's worst power play. They have a 22nd ranked penalty kill. Vancouver's power play is 10th ranked and 17th ranked on the penalty kill. Quinn Hughes leads the way for this team over the past 5 games with 6 points. Jake DeBrusk coming in hot with 4 goals, equal to Brad Marchand. David Pastrnak with 4 assists, but he hasn't scored since it feels like Canadian Thanksgiving, not to mention American Thanksgiving. David Pastrnak, I believe, only has 1 goal in Joe Sacco's tenure with this team. I'll make it 2 goals. He did score the other night in Winnipeg. He scored back on December 1st in the Centennial game, but that's 2 goals in almost a month here for David Pastrnak, which is just pretty shocking, really. He was maybe dealing with an upper body injury that kept him out of practice earlier this week, but he's not looking like himself at all. The Bruins are not the team that we're used to, but that happens. I'm not saying it's time to give up on this team by any stretch. We're Bruins fans. We love watching this team. A downturn has been expected for some time now, and perhaps we're hitting it. But I don't think it's a situation where they're going to hit rock bottom and be one of the worst teams in the NHL for some time. They do have core players in place to build around, and it's about finding the right pieces, and I don't think the pieces are fitting right now. So it's maybe time to give some of these younger guys a look. That's it for today's episode of Locked On Boston Bruins, my friends. Thank you so much for supporting the show. Please do subscribe on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube if you have not already. I'll be back on Monday with a full recap of this weekend's action, and we will bring you all the latest on the black and gold. Please do check out Locked On Fantasy Hockey Next, where Steal and Flip will give you all the tips you need to get the edge in your league this week. And it's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your favorite team every single day. I did it.